Hi, everyone, and welcome to our lesson on one of the most important crops in human history, the potato. Over the next few minutes, we'll take you through a comprehensive look at how this humble tuber shaped cultures, economies, and agricultural practices around the world. We'll start with Sean, who will walk us through early history of the potato, including its domestication in the Andes and its impact on European and Irish famine. Then Brandon will dive into the environmental and global impact, discussing monoculture, sustainability, and the potato's role in modern food systems. After that, Chandler will break down the biology and anatomy of the potato, including how it grows and adapts to different climates and soil conditions. Then, Elliot will explore breeding and genetic development, including cross pollination, GMOs, and modern breeding techniques for resilience and productivity. And finally, I'm Alexander, and I will be wrapping up our lesson by going back to the potato's indigenous roots by how Andean farmers domesticated it and developed innovative methods like freeze drying and selective tuber planting to ensure food security. Let's get started.
Hello, my name is Sean Kingsbury, and I am in the potato group, and I'm here today to talk to you about the early history of the potato. It is believed to be about 7,000 to 10,000 years ago, the potato was first cultivated where it was found growing naturally in the West Andes Mountains of South America. Uh, it's said that it grew there due to its climate. Living high up in the mountains with rough weather conditions didn't really allow any other crops to grow. So when the potato was able to survive there, the people were relying on that as a main food source because of its ability to live and grow in those locations. And then around the 1530s, the Spanish conquistadors landed in South America and discovered the people there growing and eating potatoes. And this is where they believe the potato made its way back to Spain first and then spread out to Europe through Spain. The potato did not have a particularly good reputation at first. If you did not know, the potato is a member of the nightshade family, and nightshades can be poisonous if eaten. So back then, around 1500s, 1600s, it was a survival skill to be able to identify a nightshade plant and not eat it so you could stay alive. So because of this, people were skeptical of whether or not they should be eating potatoes when they come from a group of plants that can be particularly harmful to people. Because of that skepticism, the potato did not make its way out to be a field crop, and it was only really grown in gardens for families. In Ireland, however, the people there were a little bit more on the poor side, and they came to love the potato. Um, they were able to produce much more food with it than growing wheat. And when you grew wheat, you had to have an oven to bake bread, and most poor families did not have an oven. If there was a communal oven in town, that is usually how they made their bread. But for the most part, you could have your children cook potatoes on a fire next to the fire that would be in their house. So it gave the Irish a sense of independence from wheat almost. Another thing of note, it was in Ireland, they came out or an, with an cultivar called the Irish apple. What was particularly good about this cultivar is it had a longer storage time. So your potatoes that you grew throughout the year and then harvested could be stored in a root cellar or some back room, maybe in a barn, and they would not spoil as quickly. So you are able to stretch out what you have grown over the year throughout the winter up until the point where you would plant for the next year. The potato's grip on Ireland, unfortunately, caused devastation during the Great Famine. Most people might not know, but the Great Famine didn't just affect Ireland, it was just particularly bad there. There was a potato blight that swept through all of Europe, and the blight would sometimes infest entire fields overnight, and it would cause the potatoes to eventually die. So, because of this, it's estimated that 1 million people died in Ireland throughout those 4 years, and another 2 to 3 million emigrated from the country, mainly to America. And this caused Ireland to suffer greatly. The loss of people was not very good for their economy. Um, Other than that, after the Great Famine was over and everyone was stabilized in Ireland, the potato is said to have led to the Industrial Revolution. Because of its nutritional value, um, it helped grow the world's population in 1,000 years from under 300 million to 1.6 billion people. And a share of the people living in urban areas quadrupled. So you had more cities being built because people were able to grow mass amounts of potatoes and send them to these cities where people were living and working.
Potatoes are more efficient than grains like wheat or maize because they yield more edible calories and proteins per hectare, about 7 to 9 tons compared to wheat's 3 to 5 tons. They also use much less water, needing roughly 290 liters per kilogram versus 1,000 liters for wheat, making them better suited for water scarce areas. The environmental impact of potato farming depends on practices used. Conventional intensive farming relies on synthetic fertilizers and pesticides, causing soil degradation, water pollution, and more greenhouse gases. Sustainable methods like crop rotation, organic fertilizers, and reduced tillage reduce harm by improving soil health and biodiversity. Irrigation raises yields but can increase water and energy use if not managed. Potato farming affects soil health due to deep tillage needed for tuber growth, which disrupts soil structure and can cause subsoil compaction, reducing water infiltration and root growth. Frequent disturbance also increases soil erosion, especially on slopes, leading to nutrient loss. Harvesting with heavy machinery further compacts soil, harming aeration and beneficial microorganisms. Crop rotation. Growing different crops in succession preserves soil health and nutrients. Potatoes are nutrient heavy and repeated planting depletes soil, lowering yields and increasing fertilizer use. Rotating with legumes or cereals restores nitrogen, breaks pest cycles, and boosts soil organic matter and microbiome diversity, supporting long-term productivity. Monoculture. Growing one crop repeatedly over large areas simplifies farming and can boost short-term yields but increases risks. It makes crops vulnerable to pests and diseases which can spread quickly and cause major damage. The Irish potato famine of 1845 to 1852 illustrates monoculture's risks. Ireland's dependence on a few genetically similar potato varieties made crops vulnerable to late blight, which destroyed harvests, caused famine, and mass emigration. Genetic uniformity allowed the disease to spread rapidly, showing how monoculture can lead to catastrophic crop failure. Genetic diversity in crops boosts resilience against pests, diseases, and environmental stresses like drought and soil salinity. Using diverse potato varieties reduces crop loss risk and supports sustainability. Breeding programs often incorporate wild and traditional varieties to enhance this diversity and improve resilience. Potato cultivation typically involves substantial use of chemical pesticides and fertilizers to protect crops from pests, disease, and to boost yields. However, intensive chemical use poses serious risks to both environment and human health. Pesticides can contaminate soil and water and negatively affect non-target organisms such as beneficial insects, birds, and aquatic life, causing disruptions to ecosystems. Fertilizer runoff contributes to nutrient pollution, causing problems like algal blooms and dead zones in aquatic systems. Human exposure to pesticides through food residues, polluted water, or workplace contact can result in acute poisoning and long-term health issues, including cancer, neurological disorders, and reproductive problems. Potatoes are particularly prone to pest and disease problems such as late blight, Colorado potato beetles, and aphids. To manage these threats, growers often apply multiple pesticides treatments throughout the growing season. This repeated use increases the likelihood of pesticides residue remaining on harvested tubers. The thin skin of potatoes in storage conditions can also affect residue persistence, meaning potatoes often rank among vegetables with higher pesticides residues in food safety reports. The potato is one of the most vital food crops worldwide, ranking fourth in global production after maize, rice, and wheat. Its widespread cultivation and versatility makes it a critical staple in global food security. Native to the Andes Mountains in South America, the potato was first domesticated by indigenous people over 7,000 years ago. It was introduced to Europe in the late 16th century after the Spanish conquest of the Americas. From there, it spread rapidly across Europe and later to Asia and Africa due to its high yield, calorie density, and adaptability to different climates and soils. In many regions, the potato helps support population growth and served as a vital backup crop during cereal shortage. Its short growing season and ability to thrive in poor soils contributed to its success. Today, potatoes are grown in over 150 countries. The leading producers include China, India, Russia, and Ukraine, and then the United States. The crop's adaptability allows it to grow in diverse environments from highland Peru to arid parts of China, making it an asset for food systems facing climate change. And in the bottom right, you will see a link to a video that shows all the food production countries and who leads it. And it's a cool little short video to check out. Potatoes play a major economic role as both a subsistence and a commercial crop. They provide income and employment for millions of farmers, traders, and workers globally. In developing countries, smallholder farmers benefit from the potato's short growing cycle and high productivity per hectare, which makes it an important cash crop. The potato is also a key raw material in food processing industries. Its value chain includes seed production, storage, processing, transport, and export, making it a powerful engine for rural and agribusiness development. The global expansion of fast food, especially the popularity of French fries and chips, has significantly shaped potato demand. Major fast food chains such as McDonald's and KFC have driven a preference for specific potato varieties that meet strict criteria for size, shape, texture, and storage life. As a result, varieties like Russet Burbank, known for its long tubers and low sugar content, dominate industrial production in countries like the US and Canada. This market pressure has led to narrowing of genetic diversity in commercial production and the rise of monoculture systems to meet uniform supply needs. In contrast, traditional and local varieties are often marginalized despite the resilience and nutrient value.
All right, so my portion of our teaching lesson is over the anatomy of potatoes. So I will discuss the anatomy of the plant, the ideal growing conditions for potatoes, and adaptations and new technologies that have helped potato plants go. So, the potato plant, 4 parts of the plant. The 4 parts are the flowers, the leaves, the stem, and the tuber. The flowers grow on top of the plant. They help pollinators pollinate and help potatoes breed. The leaves are what carry the starch. The stem supports the leaves and helps transport nutrients from the leaves to the potatoes or the tuber. Interesting fact about potatoes is they contain solanine, which is poisonous to humans and livestock. It's found throughout the entire plant. And the tuber is what we eat. So how potatoes grow, they are an annual plant, which means they grow every year. Starch is made in the leaves, then it's transported to the stem, which is then delivered to the tubers. The stems turn into roots, which then turn into the tubers or the potato. One plant can produce up to 20 tubulars, or the average is between 10 to 15, depending on the variety of potato. Here's a quick little video about how potatoes grow on a large scale farm. So that was a quick little video about how scale farm plants potatoes. It showed the plowing techniques that they use and the plant growing conditions. Potatoes thrive in loose, well-drained, and acidic soils. They like low pHs. They like to be somewhere between a 4.5 to a 5.5 is ideal for potatoes. They are a cool season plant, so they like cooler climates. They don't like the hot heat, but there are varieties out there now that do like the hot and the heat, so they are evolving. The ideal planting time is 2 to 3 weeks after your last frost. We want the soil to be somewhere between 45 and 50 degrees when they are planted. This varies from state to state. I know down here in the South, in Georgia, we can plant our potatoes in February. In Florida, they can do it in January. So I'm sure in states like Pennsylvania, it's probably closer to April when it heats up a little bit. They showed the technique healing, which builds the dirt or the topsoil up around the stem of the plant. And this helps keep the tuber or the potato up under the ground, which protects it from becoming bitter from the sunshine. Another interesting fact about potatoes is they're one of the only vegetables that can grow from their self or they're regenerative. So you take a potato and you would cut it into a layer over the wound, which will protect it from rotting and diseases and funguses. Next, sprouts and eyes will grow off of the potato, and these will grow into the roots and are what you're going to put in the ground to grow. Like I said, potatoes are one of the only vegetables that you can do that will grow from itself. So how have potatoes adapted over the years? There's a ton of new varieties out there. There's varieties that are drought resistant, heat resistant, they're climate resistant. So we're adapting them to meet the needs of where they're growing. One way that plants are selected to keep breeding and further study their genes would be the competitiveness. This is a category that can be broken down by like how many tubers the plant produces, how quickly they grow, and there's a bunch of other factors that lead into the competitiveness. The climate and pest and disease resistant plants. So climate resistant would be like drought tolerance, heat tolerance, frost tolerance, cold tolerance, stuff like that. And then pest and disease would be like insect tolerance, since insects are a big deal in farming. Disease tolerance, potato blight could knock out whole yields of crops. So that's a big disease that we want to try to figure out how we can grow out of the potatoes and how we can breed it out or breed plants that are resistant to it that can fight their own battles. In Kenya, with the Unica variety, they've seen a 20% yield increase, which is huge considering the fact Kenya faces food scarcity issues. The use of drones has also led to a 10% yield increase of crops. So farmers are using the drones to scan the fields so they can irrigate more dry sides of the fields. They can only use herbicides and pesticides over sides of the fields that are facing the outbreaks of the weeds or the insects. So yeah, the potato has come a long way in its existence from being a plant that the natives in South America used to now being a staple in many countries' diets and farming culture.
In regards to potato breeding, throughout most of history, we used something called cross-pollination. So you would take a potato plant that has a desirable trait and another potato plant that has desirable traits. You would take the pollen from each cross them, then allow that potato to grow, collect the seeds from that potato plant, and then keep them, pick which ones are the better seed or tuber, and then replant that potato plant, and then that plant should have the traits that you desired. Now, this would be more of a visual way of breeding potatoes. It was more of a trial and error. It took a very long time to get, takes a very long time to get where you want to go. Now, with the onset of our modern biology, we noted that a potato can either be a diploid, which means it has 2 sets of chromosomes, or a tetraploid, which has 4 sets of chromosomes. Now, when breeding or hybridizing, the modern term for that, using a tetraploid with 4 sets of genes, your alleles or allelopathies, which is the genes that were noted with the chromosomes, using a simpler diploid, potato, in one generation of hybridizing or crossbreeding, you can gain 7 generations of breeding with tetraploids are, as you can see within the image here. With the hybrid breeding, if you get the diploids, the genes that are the same for each, you have a faster breeding plan than with a traditional breeding where they're at random. So you get a bunch of random plants that may or may not have what you wanted. Now, with the modern GMOs, using a bacteria called Agrobacterium tumefaciens, you can take a genome from a specific potato plant or other entirely different species, insert it into that potato, and it integrates that genes within the plants, eliminating the need for cross-pollinations. You can get things that you can't even get with cross-pollination. Now, I found a paper on induced mutation, which utilizes gamma radiation to mutate microtubers. They used 3 different types, or 3 different parts of the potato plant. They used node stems without leaves, node stems with leaves, and microtubers, and then suscepted them to different amounts of gamma radiation. They used 8 different potatoes that grow in Kenya, and they irradiated each potato with each scheme: node stems, no leaves, node stems with leaves, and microtubers, and saw how they mutated, what genes came out of the mutation in certain potatoes, which ones are favorable, which ones weren't favorable. The advantages to doing this mutation via gamma radiation, the advantages were more, it's easier to handle small portions of a plant, not an entire plant. The generational development was more advanced than a traditional cross-pollination or hybridization. But the disadvantages were that there was a lot of volatile conditions that these stems and tubers, they had to be incubated, they had to be acclimated to the environments. There was a lot of loss in some of the schemes, and it took a long time for some of these mutations to develop. It weren't for the size and the time and the labor involved. It took a long time for these to develop results. Now, breeding potatoes and trying to find different traits and resistances, people look for different skin colors like yellows, reds, browns, spotted potatoes. When the potato matures, if it's a later maturing potato, earlier maturing potatoes for different types of growing areas, storage places, longer storage, less dense, less bruising while being harvested and stored. That's a trait that they want to work towards. And obviously a disease resistance for pests and funguses and anything that tries to, like the potato famine, as you heard within the past videos of our presentation. So some of the varieties made at the University of Wisconsin pioneered was the Millennium Russet. It has a good French fry quality. They has better color after storage than certain potatoes, as the tuber is larger and it's more uniform. There's less spots, less imperfections inside the potato. The Mega Chip variant stores well. It is the shape is good for making potato chips. The Viennetta Rose specifically has is good for canning. It's a uniform shape and size. You don't get a bunch of bigs, but a bunch of smalls. You get a more uniform size that is good for gourmet use. It looks presentable on a plate. So these are some varieties that they look for certain specific traits and sizings that they want for certain conditions.
Hello everyone, my name is Alexander Hurley. Today I'm excited to share a story that goes far beyond the dinner table. It's the story of how indigenous farmers in the Andes domesticated one of the most important crops in human history, the potato, and how their innovations transformed agriculture long before the crop reached Europe. Potatoes were first domesticated in South America. The potato was first domesticated over 8,000 years ago in the Andes Mountains, mainly in what is now Peru and Bolivia. In the book The Potato: How the Humble Spud Rescued the Western World, author Larry Zuckerman explains how potatoes were critical to Andean civilizations. They provided dependable nutrition at high altitudes where other crops failed. Farmers developed over 3,000 different varieties, all adapted to unique soils, altitudes, and seasons. This wasn't just farming, it was early genetic innovation. One of the most fascinating indigenous practices was the creation of chuno, a freeze-dried potato that could last for years. Andean farmers would leave potatoes outside overnight to freeze, then stomp them during the day to squeeze out water. Zuckerman writes that this method provided food security during times of war, drought, or famine. It was an incredible preservation technique long before refrigeration. Their innovation meant survival. Biologically, potatoes aren't roots, they're tubers, which are underground stems that store starch. They reproduce asexually through eyes, which can sprout new plants. This means one potato can produce many clones. Indigenous farmers use this trait to selectively plant only the most desirable tubers, those that were frost resistant, starchy, or less bitter. According to Zuckerman, the original wild potatoes were often toxic, and it took thousands of years to carefully cultivate to make them edible. Here we see the result of centuries of careful selection. Large, safe-to-eat potatoes bred from tiny, bitter, wilder ancestors. This transformation was a result of human ingenuity. Zuckerman describes how this mastery over plant breeding helped empower Andean societies, so much so that when the Spanish arrived, they found a civilization with complex agricultural systems, not just subsistence farmers. These are the sources I used in preparing this presentation, including images from the International Potato Center and the research institutions. And of course, much of the historical and cultural context comes from the Larry Zuckerman's excellent book, The Potato: How the Humble Spud Rescued the Western World. Thanks for watching.
So here's my works cited list. And thank you.
That's all I have on the history of the potato. These are my references. And thank you for your time.